Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos. I'm an independent journalist and a longtime Cuba solidarity activist and Puerto Rico solidarity activist based here in New York City. And once a month, I'll be bringing you a podcast from the international movement to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. On today's segment, I'll be speaking with Cesar Sanchez, one of the co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba, about their recent trip to Mexico for the International Solidarity Conference on Cuba in Mexico, and a few other related topics. There's a lot going on with Cuba right now, especially since the UN vote on Cuba is taking place next week. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of little different things. So welcome to the Bronze Titan, Cesar.
Hey, Ben, thank you for having me on.
Now, the NNOC is a good friend to this podcast. We've had several co-chairs on, so I'm glad we're finally able to get you on. Let's remind the listening audience, we're going to be using that term NNOC a lot, again, National Network on Cuba. But Cesar, you tell me, what is the National Network on Cuba?
Well, the National Network on Cuba, we're probably one of the largest and the longest standing U.S. coalition in solidarity with Cuba for a little over 3 decades. Started in September 21, 1991, in Washington, D.C. And of course, as time went on, we've expanded, and we currently have over 60 plus U.S. organizations that stands with Cuba, to kind of work together to end this inhumane blockade against Cuba. And with that, we're having, kind of like building this relationship to promoting respectful people-to-people relations between both nations. And of course, that's also through a coordinated effort to reach out through public education, cultural exchanges, all types of grassroots organizations. Of course, the NNOC, we amplified and we continue to amplify, the truth about Cuba, and we continue to mobilize collectively, action in solidarity with the Cuban people. The National Network on Cuba, we work with numerous organizations, such as labor, political and faith-based scholars, educators, students, throughout the country. Of course, with one purpose only, with one goal. Our mission is to end the blockade and all forms of aggression against Cuba. Cuba is going through a lot. So that's when we come in, the NNOC. And the NNOC, we have a lot of mechanisms. We have different structures and different techniques, and we have different kind of like things to do to people to get involved, such as we have a media task force, we got a political education task force, we have a resolution task force, and we have other, all types of means that people can get involved. And of course, as a co-chair, as one of the 5 coaches of the NNOC, I'm here to reach out to your audience and your podcast. Again, thank you for inviting me to reach out and to help us broaden our network, and to help us and join us and to be part of this Cuba solidarity movement.
And the NNLC is incredibly busy, and part of this is travel. Cesar, you recently went to an international conference, international meeting around Cuba solidarity in Mexico. So please tell us, what was it like being there? Who was there? What was happening?
Well, it was the 9th continental meeting in solidarity with Cuba. It was actually held in Mexico City. While I was there, it was. I didn't go for the actual welcoming. I got there like the 2nd, 3rd day of the actual event conference, but it was we were very well received. And within this conference, I met numerous people, a lot of great people, a lot of solidarity activists from Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, Brazil. Of course, you have the Mexican Communist Party, the Mexican Progressive Organization, the feminine organization, the LGBTQ organizations there as well, from Mexico. It was very well attended, and of course you can see that kind of solidarity support, even throughout so many years after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. It just really tells you, how committed many of these organizations throughout Latin America are so committed to stand with Cuba and to, help us, end this blockade.
Cesar, you did an amazing job. I mean, there's something you guys should know. Cesar is an artist as well as an activist. He does a lot. He's really getting into the digital world, and you did all of these wonderful, like little mini interviews with people, these little vignettes and clips. What motivated you to do that? I mean, you really hit the gamut. If you go to the NNOC Instagram, folks, you'll see all these wonderful little clips. And I know Cesar, you had a lot to do with that. Why? Well, why was it so important to do that?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that question because as part of the media task force, and we work with numerous organizations within the media task force, is that one of the problems we have in this country, especially in the belly of the beast and stuff, is that we don't have that streaming. We don't have mainstream. We don't have news, actual news that actually show us what's really occurring between the United States and Cuba, you know. And for decades, mainstream media in this country has really continued to just blatantly lie about Cuba. They continue this propaganda against Cuba, and it goes back since, if you look back since the time of the Cuban revolutions, with all these past administrations till now, so where we come in and how I started was like, okay, we need a platform, a media platform to actually, kind of show the world and let people see, view, listen to people like you and I having this conversation, who voices their opinion, who are against this blockade, who actually tells you another story that a lot of people in this country just don't know of. And too many times in this country, people has been in many ways indoctrinated, brainwashed, lack of better terms, So what motivated me was that actually just to have a one-on-one conversation. And I have interviewed a lot of people while I was in the conference in Mexico City. Some of them was Odalis Monzon, Venezuelan comrade. She was actually one of the party for the feminist revolutionary parties of Venezuela in solidarity with Cuba. Then you have people from Brazil. I actually interviewed this one Chile. He was actually an exile. He was actually exiled from Chile once upon a time. He's very old, but he's still sharp as a tack. And he lived in Cuba for quite some time. And he was telling the story how he actually, stands to support Cuba because Cuba was there for him at a time when he and his family was exiled from from Chile, I'm sorry, went to Cuba, lived there. And of course, years later, he went back to Chile, reconnected with his roots, but he never forgot the help, the support, the love, the solidarity, support from Cuba, and we talked about that, in the video that I put together. I mean, if you go to the NNOC.org and or you could just Google National Network on Cuba YouTube channel. I mean, you see I compiled numerous videos, one after the other. I mean, I interviewed Elian Gonzalez, Joanna Tablada too as well, Fernando Gonzalez, one of the Cuban Five, and of course we interviewed people like just regular Mexican individuals who just happen to walk by, even though they're not political affiliated, but even they understand it. Yeah, what the U.S. government is doing is just inhumane and just very genocidal.
So, Tessa, just to close out a little bit on the conference, what would you say are the end results of the conference? What were some of the resolutions? What is it that, in a conversation with so many folks, what comes out of something like that?
Well, I think that, in terms of resolution, I didn't really partake in that meeting, but I think that what I got out of it, and a lot of people got out of it, was that it was definitely a need for action. And what we did was actually we connected with a lot of people, and a lot of people came up with a lot of great ideas. Again, it's making that connection. It's now as we make that connection and we talked about it, is now the challenge is how do we actually make that a reality? And one of the things that the international, the Latin America and the Caribbean was really talking about and really emphasizing was just that we have to continue on, building these bridges and just continue to use all, everything at our disposal. The media, we have to use past resolutions. We have to reconnect to some of the all political parties that or organizations, and I mean, there's so many tactics and strategies that that we discuss, and I'm very positive that we could actually continue to build off that.
And that's what's beautiful when we have these. I feel like it's very unique with Cuba that these solidarity conferences, meetings come together and people walk out of there with calls to action, with work. It isn't like sometimes with other organizations and other movements where there's a lot of lip service. People leave these conferences when it's around Cuba with like, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get it accomplished. I love that. Now, one of the things I think inspired that comes from all this meeting with Cuba and how in Mexico and how we need to move forward is that there's a wonderful event this Sunday here in New York City that links to the UN vote this week. So tell us a little bit about Sunday. What's going to happen on Sunday?
Well, Sunday is going to be a rally to end the blockade on Cuba. It's going to be held at the Adam Clayton Powell State Building in Harlem at 1 o'clock this coming Sunday. And I'm encouraging everyone who's watching this video to please participate, be a part of this. We need your support. We need to make noise. And of course, as I mentioned before, bring your cell phone. Media. This goes a long way, believe it or not, and that we need to get it out there. We need because now we're living at a time that everything is so polarized and censorship is rampant, and it is really really suppressing anything that has to do with Cuba. So our job there is to be there, to make some noise, educate people, try to reach out to a broader network to help us, continue to stand in solidarity with Cuba. That's going to lead to the UN vote, which is it's this coming week. What's the following week. And with that, we also have a 24-hour global online picket that we're actually doing, which is going to be run from the 28th to the 29th. And we're encouraging people to send videos, hop in. I mean, it's a webinar, but if you can't make it, send any solidarity statement. I mean, just send us, as much as you can. Be a part of it. This way we could just really put it out there and just the whole world can see, what Cuba's enduring with this brutal blockade. And I cannot stress that enough. It's insane for more than 65 years, and yet we're still having the discussion. I mean, think about it. The UN vote, if I'm not mistaken, I think probably since 1992, overwhelmingly, I mean, since 1992, the international community has said that this is insane. I mean, they're in favor of ending this blockade. And the last UN vote, only two continue to keep the blockade going, and it's the United States and Israel, over 187 countries. So that just tells you a lot. We're winning the narrative. The U.S. government, the U.S. empire, is losing the narrative. So that's when we come in, and we got to continue to keep on pushing.
Sis, I love to ask everyone that's on this podcast this question because I love hearing the diverse array of answers. But why is this blockade set up? Why is Cuba so, quote unquote, dangerous to the United States? Why does this exist?
Well, and that's a good question, but that we'll probably have to stick for another couple hours for that. But the bottom line is just that this blockade that was imposed on Cuba really is because they're trying to shut down Cuba, because Cuba has shown the world there is another alternative way of actually living in a more just society, living together in a really true internationalism, solidarity. And Cuba is the beacon of hope. Cuba has showed the world, there is another way of actually bringing people, providing people with healthcare, free education, housing, something that in this country, in the belly of the beast, in the United States of America, we lack. I mean, if you look at the people who's homeless in this country, people has no health care whatsoever. If you have no job, you have no health insurance. And in the education is pretty much, tuition fees just keeps on getting higher and higher, and people are more getting into debt. It's insane. And what Cuba has actually showed the world, that, despite the economic hardship that they're going through because of this economic sanction, this blockade, Cuba still provides their people with healthcare, adequate healthcare, education, housing, I mean, and I'm just going to use one perfect good example of like internationalism and what Cuba still provide, through the hardship they're going through. Palestinians, perfect example, and I believe in 2024, I think it was last year actually, about over 250 Palestinians, and the numbers are growing, are actually in Cuba right now studying medicine, right? So here we are, Cuba out there sending out doctors, offering people to come to Cuba to learn, medicine, but yet, unfortunately, in this country, it's pretty much, it doesn't fit their narrative. So that's why they want to shut down Cuba. That's the reason. Because once they see what Cuba could actually show the world and see what they have done with the little resource they have, because of this blockade, imagine if the blockade was lifted. Just think about that for 1 second. I mean, really, just think about that. No, that's
Cuba is just Cuba is an inspiration. It's a beacon of light. And that's why anytime there's international media speaking favorably to Cuba, it is completely there. I've always said it's completely blocked. And Cesar, I love how you said and I agree with you, there is a media blockade on Cuba. The only narrative that runs in this country is the Fox News, the CNN, the corporate media that loves to throw that narrative. Yet when you look at international press, when you look at what they're saying in Mexico, in Dominican Republic, and Madagascar, in England, in Ireland, in Brazil, when you look at all the international press around Cuba, highly positive, highly favorable. But all of that is blocked. Folks, there is a media blockade. It's not just a political and economic blockade. There's a psychological media blockade. And Cesar, you said something about how we need to fight it. That's why, again, this is why this podcast exists, because I got tired of seeing all the Cuban American podcasts that play this U.S. corporate sponsored a narrative about Cuba that makes people think that if you're in Cuba and you say something against the government, a lightning bolt comes and strikes you, or big, the Cuban secret police appears and snatches you off the street, which is hilarious, because if you've ever been to Cuba, everyone is arguing and debating and talking about everything. No one says I disagree with this and then they're ripped out of their home. Like it's a mythology. That's a good narrative to push when you're the United States government trying to demonize a little small Latin American country that has done a lot for the world. So listen, Cesar, let's point people in directions. First of all, reiterate, Cesar, let us know what's happening on Sunday again.
Well, Sunday we have a rally. It starts at 1 o'clock. It's going to be at the Adam Clayton Powell State Building in Harlem, 1 o'clock sharp. We encourage people to be there. And then we have a 24-hour global online picket, which we're working with the Canadian Network on Cuba. And we're trying to compile and, get people to send solidarity video messages or log in. There's a register. You could register. It's a webinar. It's going to be 24 hours. So we're trying to get people involved to have this discussion, and to say, okay, what are the next steps?
And folks, listen to that call to action. Get out there on Sunday. Get onto this webinar. You want to hear more voices speaking about the truth about Cuba, besides this podcast and besides some of the other stuff you'll see on the NNOC website, the NNOC YouTube, the NNOC Instagram, then get onto that global picket. There's forces from all over the world. Various languages will be spoken on there. So, join us. Listen to what people have to say. Listen to the truth. Put down Fox News. Put down Facebook. Put down all of these places where you're getting your info. Cesar, give us the media deets, though. What is the Instagram handle? What is the website handle?
Well, I mean, as a co-chair, I mean, I am part of the NNOC, but I'm also part of the Cuba C New York, New Jersey Coalition and the U.S. Cuba Normalization Conference Committee. So if you go to NNOC.org, that's the National Network on Cuba. You could also you could Google it too. I mean, because we rank number one or number two. Actually, we're up there. So if you could Google Cuba C New York, New Jersey Coalition, we come up there. You could go click on this. You could click on the site, or you could just Google U.S. Cuba normalization, and we still rank up there as number top three, top four. I mean, that just shows you like really how people are really, how much we're growing, as an organization. And you have all the type of information about Cuba, how to get involved. Yeah, and that's again, just join us.
And folks, I'm a big fan of the NNLC. That's why I've had so many resources from the NLC be on here. And I love the resolution campaign. Get onto the website, check out the section around resolutions. There are over 100 cities in the United States that have passed resolutions calling for the end of the blockade. So when we think about, oh, this is a bunch of crazy little ultra leftist crazies, no, it's your city councils, it's your unions, it's your academics, it's a whole diverse array of people. So before you start thinking this is some crazy commie thing, get onto the NNOC and see. Maybe one of your professors has written a resolution. Maybe one of your unions. Definitely a lot of local elected officials and a lot of city councils, hundreds throughout the United States have passed resolutions. So if you need to learn another wonderful resource to learn about Cuba are those resolutions and the language in those resolutions, which are all brilliant. I feel like, Cesar, in the last month, there have been a couple more cities that have been picking up these resolutions. And if you love that idea of passing resolutions, get involved in those campaigns. Maybe there's something local. Maybe you and your friends can get your city council. If you're in a city that hasn't passed a resolution, maybe the toolkit that's there, contacting the NNLC. We're building movements. We're building solidarity, and we're showing the world that there is a support for Cuba in the United States. We all don't think alike. And what's wonderful is that the Cubanos, they understand that. They've always said that their issue isn't with the American populace. It's with the American government and these laws. So, okay, like Cesar said, get on there, nnlc.org, run an NNOC Google search, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and you'll be able to find it. All right, mi gente, familia, haceres. This has been your October edition of The Bronze Titan. Thank you so much to my friend, my comrade, my brother, Cesar, for joining with us today. Thank you to our listening audience. We're going to do the YouTube commercial. Please subscribe to this channel, like it, share it, turn on your notifications so that when I post once a month, and I've been doing pretty good, I've been posting once a month, turn on your notifications so that you can catch our next segment. Como siempre, Cuba sí, bloqueo no.